Well, good morning, everyone. As you know, I am Ann Villette, and I have started the CynrGI HR Culture Community. I'm fortunate today to have Tracy Jordan, who has been working in human resources for over 20 plus years, has had the pleasure the last few years to be working in the healthcare industry. And as you can imagine, that industry has been heavily impacted, not only from a business perspective of treating patients with the recent pandemic, but also attracting and retaining employees during this pandemic. So Tracy, thank you so very much for joining me today and taking time out of your very busy schedule.
Thanks for having me. I so do appreciate it.
Yes. So as I mentioned, the CynrGI HR community has been started because I noticed that a lot of HR professionals really want to be able to bounce ideas off of each other. There's lots of white papers, lots of webinars, lots of series that you can participate in, but really getting to the nitty gritty of the people that are down in the trenches dealing with HR related resources and expectations and issues. So just to talk about, as you know, we've had the pandemic the last 24 months. We hope that it's almost coming to the end, but there seems to be a lot of residual effects for that. So how do you think the culture where you are now has changed compared to 2 years ago?
I think it's changed pretty significantly. For the simple fact is that being in the healthcare industry, we do a lot of trainings. And so over the last 2 years and still continuing, we have not been able to do those in person. They used to be over lunches, and so we can't be in large groups, unmasked, eating lunch. And with food being such a large part of our culture, that's been a challenge for our staff not to be able to get together and to have food together. So it's certainly been a challenge. But I think we've done some things in order to improve in terms of communication. Prior to 2 years ago, communication was a challenge, and it still remains a challenge, but I think we've implemented some good processes to improve that communication, such as implementing a morning meeting. We do weekly updates to really kind of cap those over in terms of what's happening in the healthcare setting. So we've done a lot of that pieces of things.
And has that been received well, as best as it can be, given the environment?
I think it has. I think that perhaps people were better about reading those in the first launching phases of them, but maybe not quite so good at it today. But that is still how we are communicating with our staff. And so, yeah.
So what you're saying is you're finding that it was a great pivot 2 years ago when you couldn't be on site in person with each other, that people were really all buying into the kind of the new way of communicating. But are you seeing that as you phase back in where people are more on site, there's more interaction with your staff, that they're getting back to pre-COVID, not really paying attention to the written word and maybe looking at adjusting how your communication will go moving forward?
I'm not sure if we'll adjust our communication going forward at this point in time, only because we, being in the healthcare industry, still are not able to gather in large meetings.
Okay.
So it's in meetings are typically over Zoom or WebEx. And so it's certainly, we're still holding a very strong to those beliefs that, we do need to protect ourselves and our staff as best as possible.
Okay. So you're still kind of where everybody else is trying to get back to normal and determining work-life balances and having people come back in the office. You and your team are still really having to deal with kind of that I don't want to say lockdown, but you're still as if it was a year ago, treating everything the way that it is because of the industry that you're in.
Absolutely.
Okay. And what do you see is different today with recruiting than it was 2 years ago?
recruiting is totally different. And so I don't think I've been ghosted quite so many times in the last 2 years as I have in right now.
Right now.
And so that can be even after applying, that can be after they've come in for an interview, that could be after they've even accepted a job offer, and will get ghosted. So it certainly has changed. And in terms of just making those recruiting phone calls or emails that we might have done 2 years ago, they're no longer effective. And so we actually have implemented texting our candidates and to really try to reach out to them, set a specific time frame to have that conversation. And, it certainly has been a challenge.
Now, do you find that you've implemented this new way of communicating via text? Do you think that's a result of the recent pandemic, or do you think that's a result of the younger age of the workforce that's coming into the workforce looking for jobs, or do you think it's a combination of the two?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think that more people are leaning towards texts. More people have the smartphone. And I think this pandemic really ramped up our thought processes in terms of, okay, how are we going to communicate? How are we going to get in touch with people moving forward? And the challenge of hiring professional medical staff certainly has amped that up as well, because they certainly are in high need right now.
And that's what I was going to ask when you're talking about recruiting, because you not only have your administrative side, so you've got your day-to-day, I don't want to say paper pushers, but you've got the administrative side, you've got your technical side, but you also are working in a medical field where you can't pick up an article or go online and not hear about the, I don't want to say the mass exodus, but the great resignation. The medical doctors and nurses and professionals are just exhausted after the last 24 months. So are you seeing, is it across the board where you're struggling with recruiting, or is it more particular with the medical staff versus the admin side of the house?
I think we're struggling all the way around, especially with our nurses, not necessarily nurses, our medical assistants is where we are finding the significant struggle. So typically our medical assistants are some of those lower wage earners than our docs or our nurses. And so it's really been a struggle in terms of locating staff. If we're able to locate those staff, then they want big dollars that is associated with those hours. And that's certainly coupled with the closure of all the training programs that were here in New Hampshire.
Okay. And then that would bring me into, it's hard to get new people onto the team. And what are you seeing as different with retaining that staff that you've had, especially through the last 2 years?
Yeah, so we really have had to ramp up our thought processes in that regards. And so we certainly have been implementing some bonuses, some more flexible schedules. We, for specifically for bonuses, we have started an attendance bonus piece of things. And so if no one calls out in that office, they get their name put into the hat for a bonus in that particular month. So certainly have looked at that. We're also working a lot harder to keep our staff who are performing, but we're also really trying to work on that work-life balance for our staff to ensure that hopefully we're not burning them out and we're not asking too much of them.
And do you think, because I know that your company has been in the area for quite a long time and you've always attracted great staff and team members, do you feel that that focus on the work-life balance has really been heightened as a result of the pandemic?
Absolutely has been heightened. I think candidates know a little bit more about what they want and what they don't want moving forward in their lives. I think people have had to refocus somewhat in perhaps their lives. And I think some difficult decisions have had to be made within families of, do I go back to work? Do I stay home moving forward until things become a little bit more normal,
Mhm.
if that is ever going to happen?
Well, and I think too, and I think it's probably pushed employers and executive teams to really recognize that there's always been kind of, and you and I have been in the HR community for 25 plus years, that there's always been that work-life balance. And when you did your Gen X's versus the millennials wanted the work-life balance. The Gen Xers were just working, working, working. That's what their parents did. Um, but it sounds like your company is actually really understanding that moving forward with workforces, that work-life balance is really becoming nearer the top of the list for all people of all generations, not just the 20 somethings who want the 2-day work week and the 12-hour days and things of that nature, that everybody's looking for. If anything, it's been that what you said, the reprioritizing and readjusting of what you really want out of your whole life, not just your work life.
Absolutely.
And then
Absolutely.
if you had any advice for another HR professional who is struggling with a change in their culture as a result of that, what would be your advice to them?
I think you need to take a look at your own company and your own workforce and to really try and determine what's the most important thing for them. And so it's going to be different for each company, each organization. If you pay really low wages, then perhaps it's more salary. Perhaps it's more time off. Perhaps it's a little bit of a flexible schedule.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I think that's true because every industry has different needs and obligations based off of what you're outputting as a result of your business. So I think you're right. One fit isn't going to fit everybody. So you really collectively, executively, the HR team and the employees need to be, I think, open and honest with communication on what really the needs are and not be kind of that afterthought.
Right.
And hopefully, the great resignation, they keep talking about it, but and I think you and I had spoken about this before. Everybody's talking about the great resignation, but it's really more of a great readjustment to your point, what you said a few minutes ago, of what individuals really want out of their entire life, work and family life balance. And it's that readjustment of priorities as opposed to the great resignation.
I think you're right. Absolutely.
Well, Tracy, I do appreciate your time today, and I know the Synergy HR community is going to find great pearls of wisdom from our contact today. I really hope that we can check in about 6 months, and hopefully the new norm is the norm, and we can see how some of these great programs and kind of refocus on what's best for the employees in your company. We can circle back with you and see where you're at 6 months from now, not only with attracting the new people, but actually working on retaining those committed team members that you have at your organization.
That sounds fantastic.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
Thank you, Anne.